If I had to describe ODDSAC to someone that had never seen it, I would say it's kind of an experimental music video that kind of reorganizes the relationship between the image and the sound.
It's a I don't know, a selection of visual, uh, musical like vignettes.
In August of 2010, ODDSAC was released, an experimental audio-visual film directed by Danny Perez. He had previously directed music videos for Animal Collective's Who Could Win a Rabbit and Summertime Clothes. This film was not only scored by Animal Collective, but included the band members starring in multiple roles throughout the movie. It premiered at Sundance Film Festival on January 26th, on the same year of its release, before being shown in multiple theaters across the US. On the day of its release, a physical DVD copy was made available for purchase, which came with an art book featuring credits, concept art, and photos from the set. This film was recorded throughout Baltimore, Pennsylvania, and New York over the span of about 4 years. So what's the point of this movie? Well, the original project was an Animal Collective documentary sponsored by Plexifilm, but was never actually that at all. While that was the idea Plexifilm had come up with, Animal Collective and Danny Perez wanted to go with a different route.
We started talking about, I think it was because we started talking to Plexi Film about doing a, like a concert uh, movie or a documentary, um, and we weren't really interested in it in that sort of thing maybe at that time, or kind of thought we could just do something different just in terms of an Animal Collective movie. So I think it was around that time that we at least just started talking to Danny about doing something like that. Like we didn't really have the direction for it yet. We just kind of knew we wanted to do some sort of like different spin on a live movie, or yeah, more of like a documentary thing. So Danny started coming with us on tour, like as if to, you know, shoot the footage, or shoot the shows rather, and we didn't know, I think we thought at that time that that was going to be like the bulk of the content. But as we were just starting as we were starting to hang out a lot on tour with him around, we just started talking about these other visual things that could either happen in between the live bits, or that could be mixed in, and sort of like laid in with the live bits, or we didn't, like I said, we didn't really have like a full on plan for what we fully wanted. But yeah, we just started jotting down all these ideas that we had for like these little music videos, or little visual ideas that we could then compose stuff to.
Getting into the film itself, ODDSAC opens with an abstract scene of a woman pacing around in what looks like to be an abandoned house, before black ooze begins to leak from the walls. There are occasional cuts to another scene, in which Evie walks down a dark field holding an auto harp, in a costume that is only indescribable, while fire spinners perform in the background. Within the first few minutes, ODDSAC makes its experimental nature known, between sparkling shapes dancing across the screen and the absurdism of what is taking place with no known reason. It's immediately made apparent that ODDSAC is uniquely beautiful. Visually, ODDSAC is largely inspired by older horror movies, featuring plenty of weird costumes and a general horror-driven aesthetic. If you're into movies like The Stuff or Street Trash, you'll certainly get something out of this film.
I think in like as far as like narrative films, the band and I were really into a lot of kind of like mid to late 80s kind of B movie, like horror creature feature type stuff with like practical prosthetics and effects, like The Stuff or Brain Damage. A lot of those like Larry Cohen films I liked a lot. But then we were watching a lot of the kind of like these Russian fairy tale films from like the 50s and early 60s that would have these, optically printed sequences throughout to kind of have these colorful moments, to just like classic horror films. And then on the experimental world, I was really into people like Jordan Belson and like the Whitney brothers and a lot of those kind of West Coast filmmakers that worked with a lot of like optical printers and to create these like textures and lighting effects. So I liked a lot of that stuff. And I also just like trash TV and like crazy like media detritus as far as like, that kind of stimulating effect. And there's a lot of like art film influence in there, for everything from stuff like Begotten to a Japanese film like Woman in the Dunes, or even a film like Hausu. uh as far as just like the mania and kind of kinetic energy some of those films have, I definitely was inspired by. So I think there's like just a fan of movies in general, and there's everything from B horror movies to like experimental art film are kind of like in there a little bit.
But this only touches on a single element. What truly makes ODDSAC is how the music and visuals mesh together to create a full experience for both your eyes and ears. During the visual chaos, the track Mr. Fingers plays. As usual, Animal Collective explores a completely new sound, beginning with a song that's both catchy and eerie. There's a special relationship between the image and sound in this film, with both being built off of each other. This led to a combination of both story-driven scenes and scenes that act more as a visual aid to the music, rather than trying to portray something specific. Inversely, some of the lyrical tracks tell stories or have some sort of meaning, such as Mr. Fingers, Screens, and Tantrum Barb, and others are purely ambient.
Yeah, the band just started working on um separate songs and music, and then as the visual ideas started to get titles, or what I mean, then we started sort of being like, oh, okay, we've got this piece of music and that can be attached to this maybe, or this will be that vibe, or it was kind of, they kind of started happening at the same time, I think. I mean, the visuals were a lot slower going, so obviously we were at certain points, I think, like right off the bat, we were coming up with stuff before the visuals were done, but I'm sure that there were also visuals done before that, before there was music for it too. Something like Urban Cream, like, we wouldn't have done until after we saw the visuals, because I feel like that like lines up so specifically with those visuals in a way, and are inspired by those visuals. But then I could see something like, um, I mean, we knew that there'd be the sad vampire bit, so I feel like Noah went into that one with that in mind. And there were certain songs that worked like that, but then there were other things, like, say, the Fire Spinners. Like, I feel like I just wrote what happened like independently of that, without like having seen any visuals, and just feel like we wanted this crazy excited part. I think, well, that's more for the food fight, I guess, but yeah, I think it was like having a food fight in mind, but the visuals hadn't been done really, so it was just sort of like trying to imagine the soundtrack of that part.
Actually cut scenes and do stuff with the footage that we had shot, and the band would then send me music, and even if it was just some stems or a demo of some verses here and there that I could cut to. So then I would take that scene back from that stage and recut it, or kind of build on it and be like, oh, we could do something like this, and then that would in turn affect the music as far as how long a song would go on, or a different kind of part that could pop in to accentuate a visual thing that was happening. So it was kind of like a ping ponging back and forth between the two. And certain things were locked pretty early as far as like the song came in, and it was more just a matter of like remixing it or adding different elements, and then I cut to it. But there was definitely a lot of stuff that was formed in the studio, so to speak.
Once the scenes started formulating, and then there were also certain scenes that we had in mind that just we couldn't make happen, like we didn't have the time for, or that would have like added even more into the story probably. But I think for certain elements, like something like the Satin Entertainer, I think there was a lot more of a concrete idea around it at first, and then it kind of just sort of got dismembered and sort of abstracted, and it became something that was a little bit more abstract and not as linear.
The lyrical tracks quickly became the fan favorite of the bunch, which is understandable. However, the ambient tracks offer an equal amount of magic as well. Full of odd sounds and dark synths, every song has something unique to bring to the table. There's a question that arises through all this, often being brushed over or forgotten. Why isn't ODDSAC more popular than it is? One logical assumption is that it's partially due to ODDSAC being the successor to the band's hit album Merriweather Post Pavilion, released only a year prior. But the biggest issue that came with ODDSAC's release was its accessibility. Not in terms of being weird, as Animal Collective is no stranger to experimentation, and ODDSAC is something that most fans would enjoy if given the chance. Rather, how its release was categorized as a movie and not an album. ODDSAC is a very unique entity. It is not something you can just put in a box. Unfortunately, people are quick to do this anyway, so when ODDSAC released, it was simply labeled as just a film by most who came across it, which caused some issues to pop up. Record stores refused to sell copies of the DVD. Pitchfork, who reviewed every other Animal Collective album up to this point, denied ODDSAC a review. And perhaps the biggest problem, the music wasn't put on streaming services. While this was a conscious decision by the band, who didn't want the visuals and music to be separated, it meant that it went unnoticed by a lot of fans who only listened to their music on platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, and pushed it closer to being considered only a movie. Despite all this, whether you consider ODDSAC a movie, an album, or something else entirely, this piece of art is something truly special and has garnered a lot of love from the people who have seen it.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of their work and their ability to kind of just constantly reinvent themselves, and they're such amazing musicians and create such beautiful sounds. Any visual artist would love to have that as input or a collaborator.